Hello everyone, Jeff and Jay here with another edition of Jay's Big Adventure. I'm Jeff, Jay's the fuzzy one, and today we're doing an update on our 2004 Nissan Frontier Supercharged 5-speed truck that we bought with a bunch of little problems and a dead supercharger. So we've got the supercharger off to be rebuilt, and today we're just doing some basic maintenance. As you can see, we have the nose of the supercharger off. We're getting new bearings pressed in. That goes here and ends up tying in with this drive belt. Comes up over the nose of the supercharger, and those are the bearings that died. And I think that's partly why it's not producing any boost. However, there's also a bunch of other stuff that's going on. This is an 04. It's got just ready to turn 80,000 miles, and I got it used from a guy that didn't know the supercharger wasn't working, which tells me more than I want to know, I'm afraid. So before we start doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff, we're going to go back and just do some basic maintenance. One of the things I want to do is replace all the spark plugs, and here the number 6 one in the back is a real pain. We'll see how that goes. And then we're also going to work on replacing all the oxygen sensors, because when I pull the codes, it says a high voltage reading on the oxygen sensors, which leads me to believe that it's an open circuit. So we're going to replace 4 of those, and then we've got plugs and plug wires and cap and rotor. Whenever you're getting a new vehicle, for me, one of the first things I do is to get everything back to square one in terms of maintenance. I'm going to change all the fluids in the truck. I'm going to do cap rotor plugs, all the stuff that people tend to not do when they decide they're going to trade a vehicle in. And I want to get everything back to factory stock, and then we'll start playing with it. Today's project is going to be in multiple parts. Let's get started. A little bit of closer inspection. I think I'm going to take the supercharger and the intake manifold off. It'll make doing the plugs a lot easier, and I can get to the knock sensor, which is underneath the back of the manifold. Knock sensors are only $10, but again, since I know the thing is not producing boost, we're just going to start from scratch. So do all the plugs, all the wires, all the oxygen sensors, and get that knock sensor done. I think it'll just make the whole job easier if I just take the supercharger off. In the mechanics world, the 10mm sockets hold a special place in hell for most of us. They are the hardest sockets to find, and they are the easiest ones to lose. As I was taking the bolts off of the supercharger mounting plate, I got these 3 in the back, got this guy in the front, got these 2 along this side underneath the wiring harness. As I come back to try to get this guy, of course, the 10mm socket falls off the end of the extension. Now, from there, you can tell there are all kinds of really entertaining places for that darn socket to go. And if you get really lucky, it will actually fall all the way through. That's what happened this time. We got lucky. It did, however, in 10mm socket fashion, fall to the exact center of the truck. Luckily, Jay is here to save the day with his magnetic retrieval tool. Thanks, Jay. For the 2 lower bolts, I found that with a long extension, I can actually snake it in from behind the brake booster underneath the plenum. I can get that bolt and the one on the back side just like that. You can also do this one with just with an open-ended wrench, but this is a lot easier. Next, we're going to remove this hose clamp so we can pull that hose off the back of the supercharger. And I'm just going to take this 10mm bolt out to get this clip out of here. Note to self, always remember to remove all of the bolts. This one was keeping the whole assembly from coming off. Okay, we are making progress. I've got the supercharger off, and now we're going to take these bolts out and take that plate off. But before I do that, I'm going to clean this up just a little bit and run some rags down in those holes so that if I drop a bolt, it does not fall down into the engine. Don't ask me how I know that particular trick. The previous person that had worked on this has just gooped everything up with gasket sealer, and it has frozen that manifold to the one below it. So just had to just get a little hammer and just knock it loose. And now I should be able to get it out. There are a couple of vacuum lines right in the back of this that I had to pull out. These guys here. Let's see if we can get this to focus here. There we go. So 2 vacuum lines and a clip, and we are out. Next, we have to take this idler pulley assembly out so that when we get the opportunity, this upper manifold will come out. So this has got to come off as well. Okay, finally got all the fuel injector clips off. That one was a pain in the butt. Even with this thing loose, it was still really difficult to get that one up high enough to get it out, but I did. So now there are 4 bolts that hold the entire fuel rail in. And they are, if I can see them, there's one right down there. They're hex bolts. There's one there, and there's 2 in the back. Okay, we are getting really close. I have the hose down here off. It's a little hard to see, of course, but it's down in here. And then I took the upper hose off of the heater core. And now the manifold is loose, so we're going to try to work this out of there. Did it. So the manifold is out. There is the knock sensor. Just amazing to me that this has taken that much time and effort. But there it is, it's out. I'm going to replace a bunch of hoses while I've got it all apart this far, and then we will put it all back together. We're working on a BMW or a Nissan. I can never seem to remember what bolts go where. So I use plastic bags and a marker and just label what they are. These are the base plate bolts here, which go on next. These are for the injection rail, especially if you're going to take some time between jobs. I never seem to remember what bolts go there, so I mark them so I can remember next time around. Steadily making progress on the upper and lower intake manifold replacement. As you can see, I've got the lower manifold reinstalled, put brand new Velcro gaskets in there. Just use a little bit of RTV to tack those gaskets down, so when I'm messing with the manifold, trying to get that in place, they don't slip. Also got a little piece of duct tape just over the intake runners to make sure that I don't drop anything down in there when I'm not looking. And we're ready for the next step. I have tightened all the bolts. You can see them here. There's 4 here. You start and crisscross them and work your way out from the center. That helps make sure that the manifold is bolted down without any stresses on it, and will make it seal. The next step is going to be the fuel rail. We're going to reinstall that, and I've got new gaskets on there, and I've just used a little bit of blue RTV to hold those in place so that as I'm wrestling that fuel rail back into position, I don't knock one of those guys out of place. And then the next step will be the lower supercharger plate and then the supercharger itself. So we're making progress, and hopefully it's going to run very soon. So Jay is holding a very small little gasket, and that goes between the fuel injector rail and the manifold. And the purpose of those, there's one right here, is to go under that bolt hole and insulate the manifold from the fuel rail so the manifold's not passing heat up into the gas. Those are incredibly hard to get in there and get the bolt down through it without having it go wandering off into no man's land, and the real tough one is back here. So what I've done is I've just added a little piece of tape to it. This is just duct tape, and that way not only can it not get away, but I can actually move it even though I'm not actually touching that piece itself. And you can see I've got this one done back here, and there's my little piece of tape that's left. The bolts on it, I'm ready to tighten that nut, and when I'm done, I'll just yank that tape off of there, and that way that bolt and that washer end up in their proper place. Okay, we are ready to install the Supercharger base plate, and I've added just a very thin coating of RTV just to stick that gasket in place, so that when I start putting the base plate on, that gasket won't move around. So here's our paper gasket. This should seal really well. I'm just going to lay this on here and give that just a little bit of time to dry. And now when I put that plate on there, it shouldn't move on me. Okay, I've got the base plate mounted. We're ready to start installing the bolts. And before I do that, I've taken rags and stuffed them down into the intake, because the last thing I want to do is to be reaching for a bolt hole, drop the bolt, and have it fall down into the intake, because at this point it'd go all the way to the intake valve. That would be bad. What I do not want to have to do is undo everything that I've done and then take a head off as well.